All right, so where do our rights actually come from? It's a huge question, right? It totally shapes how you see government, freedom, even your own value as a person. We're about to break down a text that gives a very, very specific answer to that fundamental question.
So, right off the bat, the argument we're looking at here lays out two totally different ways of thinking about this. On one side, you've got rights that come from the government. The catch? Well, that means they can also be taken away. But on the other side, you have inherent rights. These are things you're just born with. The government's job isn't to grant them, its job is to protect them. And that single difference is the key to this entire point of view.
Okay, so if the government isn't the source, then what is? This is the big one. The whole case this text builds really hinges on the answer. Let's dig into its foundational claim.
First things first, we gotta be clear on what this framework even means by inherent rights. Basically, it's saying these are rights you have simply because you're human. Not because you earned them, not because the government gave you a handout, they're just part of the package of being you. And here it is. This is the absolute heart of the argument. According to this text, the reason your rights are inherent, the reason they can't be taken away, is because they come directly from a divine source, the idea that humans are made in God's image. This isn't just a side note, it's the bedrock for this whole way of thinking. So, once you've established that as the source of rights, the next question is pretty obvious, right? What's the government's proper role in all of this? This next section dives right into that. The whole dance between state power and protecting the individual. And to really hammer home what's at stake here, this document poses a pretty critical question. It wants us to think about the risk of that first model we saw. What are the consequences if we believe our rights just come from the government? And the answer it gives is, well, it's blunt. If a right is a gift from the state, it can be taken away. Simple as that. This really gets to the central concern of this viewpoint that it makes your rights seem kind of flimsy, totally dependent on who's in charge, rather than being permanent and absolute. This all leads to an even deeper question, this time about the nature of power itself. See, it's one thing to say rights need protection, but this text digs into why that protection is always, always necessary. And here's the answer it provides. This philosophy doesn't see power as some static thing that just sits there. It views it as an active force that is always trying to grow. Think of it like a gas that will expand to fill any container. From this perspective, power will always push into the space of your personal liberties unless you actively push back. That means protecting rights isn't a one-and-done deal. It's a constant, ongoing struggle. Now, this argument doesn't just stay in the world of theory. It gets very practical. It moves on to identify what it sees as modern-day threats, and then it lays out a real action plan to respond to them. So, what are these big threats? Which freedoms does this source say are most at risk from this expanding power? Well, it calls out three specifically: religious liberty, speech, and freedom of conscience. It frames these as the current front lines in the battle to defend inherent rights. In response to those threats, the text proposes this three-step plan. It starts with education, teaching the next generation about God-given rights. Then it calls for action, specifically defending religious freedom. And finally, it emphasizes resolve, standing firm against any coercion that would violate these core liberties. So, to wrap this all up, this material doesn't end with a summary. Instead, it leaves us with a single guiding principle, a scriptural verse that's really meant to capture the entire philosophy. The verse chosen is Acts 5:29, which states, "We must obey God rather than human beings." This serves as the document's ultimate conclusion. It's the idea that when human law and divine law clash, your final allegiance has to be to the authority that these rights are said to come from in the first place. And so we end on this central question. The argument we've just explored insists that whether rights come from a government or from a creator isn't just a philosophical debate. It defines their strength, their permanence, and ultimately, who holds the final authority.